Okay, so we covered, or we're covering in this step, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. So there's 6 books of history, and these books of history are during the kingship. Okay, when the Hebrew nation is under the kingship of, beginning with Saul, and then on to David, and then on to Solomon. Okay, so let's turn the page, the second side of the page, and we will look at the important teachings. Okay, number 1, we have a change of history in which, remember before we got into the kings, we talked about the judges, right? Okay, after Joshua, then we went into Judges, and that's the period of the judges. From the judges, we get into the period of the kings. Okay, who is the last judge in that era of the judges? Look at number 1 right here. Changing from judges to kings. 1 Chronicles 17:10. Samuel is the last king. He's also a prophet and a priest. Okay, and this is interesting because Samuel is in that period when it changes. Okay, from the judges to the kings. Okay.
You said he's the last king. You mean he's the
I-
last judge.
I'm sorry, he's the last judge. Thank you for the correction. You see, I need a correction. Somebody watching God, he's.
Check to see if we're listening.
Okay, that's a good excuse. Okay. Okay, so Samuel is the last judge. Okay, because I have here the time changes from judges to kings. Okay, Samuel is not a king. Okay, he is the last judge, but he's also a prophet and a priest. Can you think of someone else that was a judge, a prophet, and a priest? Maybe. Well, in the back, yeah, Jesus, yeah, for sure. Okay, Jesus is. Okay, when we look forward, and up to now, yeah, Jesus is all of these. Okay, who else? Maybe. David was not in the judges. The judges passed. Okay. Real quick. Probably, and I say probably. Okay, you need to look at the life of Moses. Okay, Moses was a prophet because he was appointed together with his brother. Okay, to be a prophet. He was also when they put together the priesthood. Aaron was the priest, and his family members were the priests. But Moses went up the mountain, and he was the intermediary there, so he was the priest between God and the people. Okay, so Moses played a part there in the priesthood. Okay, and so he was he did do the part of a priest. Was he a prophet? Yes, he was a prophet also. Okay, and so Moses is maybe another one in the class of Samuel. Okay, there was prophet, priest, and judge. Okay, now Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. Okay, of course Jesus is a judge also. Okay, but let's go to number 2. The kingdom is united, but the kingship is divided. What I mean by this? That you have the kingdom of Israel, or the kingdom, and it is one kingdom, but the kings are divided because God rejects Saul because of some bad things he did. Okay, and then God calls David, but then Saul begins to persecute David, and so you have there. It's not that it's divided; it's that Saul does not let David into the kingship because he feels, of course, he feels rejected. He is rejected by God. Okay. So I put it here in parentheses. Saul pursues David to death. He wants to kill him. Okay. Can Saul kill David? No, Saul can't kill David. David is God's anointed and God's chosen, and Saul is not going to ruin God's plan. Okay, so he's over there. You can see that these efforts by Saul are just completely in the flesh, completely personal, and in his life, even though he's called by God, he's called to be king. he is working directly against God's will and against God's plan. It's useless, okay? And that reminds us, we need to say, God, I want to follow your plan. Help me to put my plans aside, and that my plans will be in accordance with your plans, So we have here, the king is united, but the kingship is divided. Saul pursues David to death. Number 3, God chooses Saul, but rejects him after his rebellion. And I have here 1 Samuel 13 and 14. And I'm going to read that very quickly, because just to read it right here, okay? You have done a foolish thing. This is Samuel talking to Saul, and of course Samuel has been sent by God. Okay. Samuel said, "You have not kept the commandment, or the command that the Lord your God gave you. If you had, you would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." Isn't that amazing right here? If Saul had been obedient to God's commands, he would have been kingdom or king, and his people or his lineage would have been, kingdom. He would have extended his kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler over his people, because you have not kept the Lord's commandment. It's that simple. Keep the Lord's commandment, and God's blessing is on you. Don't pay attention to God's commandments. God will put you aside and put someone in your place. Okay, so that's a very important passage right there. Okay, let's go to number 4. David is chosen to reign forever, and I put here in parentheses. Okay, quotations. Forever. What does that mean? Forever. It doesn't mean that David's going to live forever. It means that his family line will endure forever, because Jesus comes through that family line. Okay. And when you look at First Chronicles 16, let me look up here. First Chronicles 16 and is it 15? It says, "He remembers his covenant forever, the promise he made for 1,000 generations, the covenant he made with Abraham, the oath he swore to Isaac." Okay, it's coming through that promise that he made through Abraham and Isaac. Okay, and it continues through David. So God's promises and God's plan will go on forever, on and on and on and on. Okay, and whoever is in the plan, God will take it to the end. And in this case, when David becomes king, okay, God puts into let's say practice, if I can put it that way, or he begins a plan for the kingship to go on to Jesus as king. Okay, in other words, in the end, Jesus is king over everything, over all. Okay. Okay. You also, if you we're right there in 1 Chronicles 16. Go to turn the page to 1 Chronicles 17. Let's go to the next chapter and verses 10. In this passage, if you look at 1 Chronicles 17, you look at the top. It says God's promise to David. Okay, here's all kinds of promises that God has given to David, promising him, his kingdom will last forever. Does that mean that David will live forever? No, his kingdom will live forever, because it's the kingdom of Jesus. Okay, but if we look at a few verses here, for instance, if you look at verse 10, 17:10, it says, "And have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also subdue all your enemies. I declare to you that the Lord will build a house for you. When your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom." Okay, he is the one I will build. He is the one that will build a house for me. That's talking about Solomon. Okay, so the promise goes on to his descendants. Okay, so it's not like Saul. Saul messed up. He's put aside. when God chooses David, God is telling David, I'm going to use you and your ancestors after you to fulfill all these promises. Okay? The covenant continues with Solomon. If you see here, 1 Kings 9, 1 through 5. Let's go to 1 Kings 9, 1 through 5. And let's start with really 1 Kings 9, beginning with verse 3. The Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple which you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, and here's the promises that God gives to Solomon. Okay, if you walk before me faithfully, notice how it has that word "if." Okay, the promise is dependent on if he walks faithfully before God. Okay, with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws. I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But, verse 6, you see the but right here? But, if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commandments and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land? And it goes on and on and on out there. Okay? God is saying, be faithful, I'm going to bless you. Stray away, I'm going to make this thing or your history so bad that people will go by and say, what happened to these people? They used to be a great people. They used to be God's people. They used to be blessed. You know. Does that happen? Yes, it happens. We hate to say it, you know. But it's a lesson for us, okay, nowadays. God has all kinds of good promises for us, but if we don't walk according to his ways, you know, what's the word? Erase these promises. These promises don't apply anymore if you don't walk in God's ways. So when we walk in God's ways and do his will, we have all kinds of good promises, and God has all kinds of good plans for us. Okay? It says here, it also gives the consequences if they turn away from God. We already read that. Okay, verses 6 through 9. Number 5, the kingdom is divided. God rejects the reign of Solomon because of his paganism. And I'll put this word right there, paganism. Why did I'll ask a question, did Solomon become a pagan? Did Solomon become pagan? I put it here, God rejects the reign of Solomon because of his paganism. Well, what happened to Solomon, okay, Solomon, he remember he prayed the prayer before God, and God said, oh, I'm going to bless you with wisdom and, you know, more than any man, and so on and so on. So he had all kinds of blessings on him. But he started marrying all these foreign women. And the Bible says very clearly that these foreign women, foreign wives, or concubines, strayed him away from the things of God. Okay? And God, you're not going to hold God to a promise when he says, I will bless you if. Okay? God is not binding himself to bless you all the time. God puts limits, okay, on your blessings. And that's why you come across a lot of Christians. They don't have the blessing of God. They're living, you know, terrible lives. And so they can't expect God's blessings. Okay? And so we learn it from right here. Beginning with the king. If the king doesn't walk right, what does he expect? If we don't walk right, what do we expect? Okay, that's a great lesson we learned from these passages right here. And I have here 1 Kings 12, 1 through 24. That's a whole chapter. Okay, but let's go back to 1 Kings 12. Okay. 1 Kings 12, it says at the top of chapter 12, Israel rebels against Rehoboam. Who was Rehoboam? That was the son of Solomon. Okay. God's blessings were faithful up to Solomon. Solomon turned to paganism, or in part, he married pagan women, and God's blessings were retrieved. Okay? And God told Solomon through the prophets that the kingdom would be divided. Okay? Of course, the kingdom is divided, and Solomon's son, Rehoboam, he experiences this division, and he does not receive the same blessings, okay, as Solomon. And so you have that whole chapter right there that talks about Rehoboam going against God's will. Okay. Number 6, God chooses Jeroboam, but he does not follow the Lord's commands. Who's Jeroboam? Okay, if we look at 1 Kings here, same chapter, chapter 12, beginning with verse 25. Jeroboam is chosen by God to lead the other tribes of Israel. Okay, how many tribes are in Israel? 12 tribes, right? 12 tribes. Okay, and when God divides the kingdom because of Solomon's inconsistencies, and I say paganism, 10 tribes. 10 tribes go to Jeroboam, and 2 tribes stay with Judah. Okay, it's Judah and Benjamin that stay together, and they become the northern kingdom. Okay, the southern, I'm sorry, Judah and Benjamin become the southern kingdom. The other 10 tribes become the northern kingdom. And we talked a little bit about that last week. Okay, who's the northern, who's the south? Okay, sometimes I get mixed up. Okay, okay, but we see here that God chooses Jeroboam to lead the northern kingdom, or that is the 10 tribes. Okay, and I put here verses 25 through 33. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but it's a story where God sends a prophet to anoint Jeroboam, okay? And Jeroboam that begins to do the work of the Lord, okay? So, that passage right there, I'm not going to get into it right now, but you can read it, when you have time. Okay, let's go to number 7. The northern kingdom, that is the 10 tribes, passes into idolatry, is overcome by the Assyrians. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 17. Let's go to 2 Kings chapter 17, and we see that the northern kingdom, that is the 10 tribes, become so pagan that God rejects them. Okay, and of course the whole chapter right there has to do with them receiving the consequences. Let's look for instance, beginning in verse 7, it says, Israel exiled because of sin. It says, all this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of Egypt, from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. The Israelites secretly did things against the Lord, their God, that were not right. Okay? From watchtower to fortified city, they built themselves high places in all their towns. What does it mean they're high places? These are places of worshiping the idols and sacrificing to idols. Okay? They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles in every high hill and under every spreading tree. So you see, it's describing how pagan they became. Okay, the 10 tribes to the north. Okay, and so verse 13, the Lord warned Israel and Judah. Look at right here. It says the Lord warned Israel and Judah. In other words, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. He warned them through his prophets and seers And what did they say? Turn from your evil ways, observe my commands and decrees, in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey, and that I delivered to you through my servants, the prophets. But they would not listen, and were as stiff-necked as their ancestors. Okay, I can keep reading on and on. But this passage right here tells you why God let them go to the pagans of the world. You know, remember how we talked that God chose the Hebrews, took them out of Egypt, and it was taking them into the promised land, and that certain nations, certain tribes were already condemned by God because of their paganism, and God was introducing His people. Well, His people turned out to accept all the paganism, and they became the receivers of the judgments of God. Okay? What sort of lesson do we learn here? That if we become as bad as the world, we can expect to receive the judgments that come along with living that kind of life. Okay? And so nowadays you see a lot of people, you know, they're out there, you know, living crazy, and they say they're Christians. I'm not going to argue with them that whether they are or not, but they're not living the blessings of God. They're not living the abundant life in Christ Jesus because they're receiving the consequences of their sin. Okay? I'm not going to discuss whether they're saved or not. That's up to God, and that's up to them, you know, to establish their, you know, whether they're saved or not, whether they were really saved or not in the beginning. Okay? But it's under a shade of doubt whether they're really saved. Okay? And so, when a person wants to have an abundant life and they want to be sure about their salvation, they want to be sure, they have that assurance when they walk according to God's plan and according to God's laws, or you know, the Word of God, and they enjoy an abundant life. They enjoy, you know, happiness and, you know, prosperity and all kinds of things, because God's blessing is upon those people that walk right. Okay, and the people that get messed up or intermingled with the world, their lives become a mess. Okay. So, in this passage right here, we see what happened to the northern kingdom. Okay. Okay, we're out there in chapter 17. If we go to chapter 18, let's turn the page. The northern kingdom. We're still talking about the northern kingdom, and now we can talk also about the southern kingdom here. In chapter 18, let's look at verses 9 through 12. It says, in King Hezekiah's 4th year, now King Hezekiah was king of Judah. In other words, the southern kingdom, okay? Which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, marched against Samaria and laid siege to it. And at the end of 3 years, the Assyrians took it. So Samaria was captured in Hezekiah's 6th year. Okay. Hezekiah is king of the southern kingdom, but he's watching what's going on in the north. He watches the northern kingdom, they fall. But even then, he doesn't learn from that. Okay? And so if you read this whole passage right here, for instance, verse 11, the king of Assyria deported Israel to Assyria and settled them in Halah, in Gozan, in the Haber River, in the towns of the Medes. This happened because they had not obeyed the Lord their God, but had violated His covenant. All that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, they neither listened to the commands nor carried them out. Okay? And then in the next verse, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah reign, Sennacherib, king of Israel, attacked all fortified cities of Judah and captured them. You see? Southern kingdom is falling down along with the northern kingdom. And if you notice right here, it says, Sennacherib, he captured, or he attacked the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. In other words, these are cities out in the outlying areas. He's not talking about Jerusalem yet. Jerusalem hasn't fallen. But the outlying cities fell to the Assyrians. Okay? Is this enough for Judah, the kingdom of Judah, to learn? Well, yes and no, because eventually they became so disobedient that they did fall, but to the Babylonians, not to the Assyrians. Okay. So that takes us to number 8. The southern kingdom, that is the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, remains faithful to the Lord, but not completely, beginning with Solomon. 1 Kings 11 and 12. They are also taken into captivity. And I just read the passage right here. They also fell to captivity. Okay? We're in 2 Kings. If we go to chapter 23, verses 26 and 27, look what it says. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah, because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence, as I removed Israel. And I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple about which I said, my name shall be there. Can you see how? Right here? Judah, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom is falling just like the northern kingdom. Why did the northern kingdom fall? Because of their paganism. Because they got into the world. Because they became like any other nation, you know. Well, they did not obey God's plan, okay?